Hello and welcome to this video for today, whether you're here for the first time or you're returning. Hope you will enjoy. Alright guys, we're getting into this video today here where we're getting into another of our Getting More Nitpicky with Cards series of videos. And in today's video, I'm getting more nitpicky with mana rocks. Yes, I promised I would get more nitpicky with mana rocks in our ramp video that I came out with just a little while back. But, you know, it was foreshadowing. I knew I was going to do it, definitely, 100%. But yes, I definitely was. But anyway, yes, I want to talk about getting more nitpicky with mana rocks. It's one of those things, like, I don't play very many mana rocks at all, but the thing is, even though I have built a few decks with without green in them a few times in the past, but for the most part I've sort of stayed out of not running green, because I just find that every time that I've not played green that I have a bad time, and yeah, just green is OP, so, and we all know this, so yeah. I think that I've experienced that feeling that a few people have felt, where they're just like, oh, the green player is going off and having 600 mana you know, on turn 3 or 4 or whatever. Right, yep. Yeah, it'd be nice to have some amount of mana and whatnot at all. Great. You know, so that's kind of why, again, I've just sort of put myself into that position where I'm like, okay, I'm just going to play green. But anyway, we want to look at mana rocks here for the most part. I was to sit down and say to myself, okay, let's build a deck, and I want to build a deck that's not in green, or I definitely wouldn't want to build a deck in green that has mana rocks unless it's a really weird deck. But again, this is just an experiment that we're going to go through and say this is the sort of deck we wanted to build. A deck with mana rocks in it. Let's say that. Instead of saying not in green, because you're mostly not going to be in green, but there's just some really weird outliers again. And I know some people run mana rocks in green, which is really weird, and I don't understand. Like Soul Ring, I get it, it goes in every deck, whatever, sure, whatever. Wayfarer's Bauble isn't really an artifact, really, it's just a spell that gets you a land into play. Same with, you know, Font of Fertility, whatever. That's not really a enchantment, it's a spell that gets you another mana into play. That's what those spells are. They're spells to get you more mana into play. That's it. Like, again, I don't consider those things that just are gone within 5 seconds or whatever of playing them to be an actual, you know, part of that. But anyway, back to our regularly scheduled program of mana rocks. So mana rocks, when I'm talking about what I would look for if I was to build a deck in these colors, again, it's sort of hard because there are a lot of options that are quote-unquote fast mana, and even Soul Ring is considered fast mana. But, you know, if I was dedicated to having artifacts for the most part, you know, there are some new options that sort of have come out recently in the Boros deck, I think it was. They had the new, is it Exploration map? I think that's what it's called. That's basically a artifact that tutors 2 lands to your hand, but if an opponent plays a land and they have more lands than you, you can play a land from your hand into the battlefield. So it's sort of slow, but it does let you ramp those 2 lands eventually, because if you're playing this artifact, and I don't consider it a mana rock, but it is a sort of thing that gets you extra mana. Um, it's really quite good. Like that's a good effect. So I'm kind of also lumping those sort of effects to a degree in here, because again, you're looking at a very narrow sort of thing that sort of says mana rocks to a degree. Otherwise, I don't know. But anyway, things that net you more mana, like Keeper of the Accord, I think that's not a mana rock, and it's not really a great source of mana. And there's a couple other ones. I can't remember what the one is called. That's from the command deck from a couple of years ago. That you can look at the top card of your library, and if an opponent has more lands than you, you can put it into play. If it's a land, that one, and just a couple others that are in green, in white essentially. Actually, sorry, me and my dyslexia. Like Knight of the White Orchid. That one's basically the same thing. Gets a land into play if you have less lands than an opponent. So there are a few other ones like Monologue Tax and of course Smothering Tithe that just makes mana. These things are really good in certain decks, and I like some of them are okay. If you have wheels, certainly Smothering Tithe is amazingly dumbly good, but you've got to be sort of 3 or 4 color for that. But that's not too hard. But again, it gives you things that are essentially mana rocks, which are treasures or which are gold. There are some things that give you gold and treasure as well. So those things that produce mana all the time, or produce it in such a quantity that you might as well say that it's all the time, they're permanent sources of ramp. So I wouldn't really count them like this way. Like again, like I sort of said, I've gone on this tangent to say, hey, look, I wouldn't really think about this. This is like, these are other cards that do other things, but they exist, and if you want to play them, they're alright. Some of them have other synergies and whatnot, but again, we'll get back to actual mana rocks, try and get off this tangent, but I thought I better, explain that a little bit to a degree. I don't know how well I explained it, but I hope I did. But anyway, mana rocks. Yeah, absolutely. Like, if we're in a deck and like we have very low options, I would consider playing Sol Ring, even though again, like I sort of said, I don't particularly like Sol Ring, and I think it maybe should be banned. I would consider putting it in, and it's pretty easy include to put in. Other fast mana rocks I probably wouldn't consider putting in. It depends on your budget again, but like the other ones that are, cheap as far as CMC wise are not very cheap in terms of dollars wise. So I don't really want to put a $150 something card into my deck that much. I would rather put $150 something into my entire deck rather than just one card. So, the Mana Crypts and the Mana Vaults and the like of the world and the Moxes and whatnot of the world, I just don't see myself using, because it's like, well, what's the point? It just sort of becomes one of those things where, yeah, sure, I could do it, but on my budget, if I really, really wanted to, but I just don't want to. So then we're just going to skip, because there's just like nothing in one except for Sol Ring that really you would play. There's a few weird things that you can sort of play that make mana, but you sort of have to have a lot of other synergies to make them actually net you mana. They sort of just filter mana and things like this. But then you go to 2CMC. So at 2CMC, there is a lot of stuff that you can play in your decks. The Signets, obviously, everyone knows about the Signets. They are some of the best cards that they printed many years ago. They reprinted, oh, well, he didn't reprint, but they did reprint them several times. But anyway, they printed a card, Arcane Signet, a few years ago. I think a few people might remember that one. That one's just pretty damn dumb and just really quite good. That one I would consider as well. It's not one of the OG Signets, but again, it is a Signet and it is 2 mana, and that's the sort of thing that we would look for. The Talismans, depends on what, again, same with Signets, depends on what 2 colors or 3 colors we're in, but I would definitely consider these for the most part. But if we're in 1 color, it's a lot more difficult because you just don't have access to as much stuff, and you're just like left with worser options. But there are some other options like Felwar Stone. Felwar Stone's okay as well. Mind Stone is actually quite good as well. Yeah, sure, it doesn't give you a color, but mostly it doesn't really matter. It's just fine being what it is and just giving you extra mana. You just need extra mana at this point. That's all you need. You don't really care that much about fixing, and you're like, especially when you're monocolor or maybe 2 color, you just don't need it that much. Maybe when you're 3 or 4 color, maybe you might need a little bit of it, but again, you can have fixing in your lands. That's why you run dual lands and whatnot. So I just don't really see like the argument for running too much actual mana fixing in these sort of slots. It doesn't really matter for the most part. You don't absolutely need it. So I would just like not worry about it, and having that 1 or 2 cards that are in your deck that sort of don't produce a mana of a color just is not going to come up too much. But that's just fine as well, because like again, Felwar Stone can sort of whiff and whatnot. There are some other 2 mana rocks, but most of them aren't as good or as playable in my opinion. And I just see that a few people play like the Diamond Cycle or whatnot. The Diamond Cycle I don't really like. There's a few that are like that basically do the same thing, but they're in more colors, or potentially more colors at least, for the most part, but they all come in tapped. And yes, sometimes on like turn 2, you don't really have that much to do. You're just kind of like, okay, I'll play my 2 mana rock and that's it. I won't be able to cast anything off of it. And that does happen, sure. But the thing is, when you start getting to like the mid game or even the late game, and this is like that whole quadrant theory stuff that happens in game, because you start assessing cards more like, okay, what if I draw this card mid game instead of early game? What if I draw this card late game instead of early game? How good is it then? You start assessing these things in different ways. How good is it then? So when you get to that mid to late game and whatnot, the ability for a card to come in untapped is way better, because again, you can probably use it immediately for something very easily. There are some ritual effects out there as well. I sort of forgot to mention these, but I really wouldn't go into these because that's temporary mana, and temporary mana is fine. Sometimes it'll give you something extra, but I wouldn't count it as actual ramp or whatnot. I would look at it in your ramp slot sometimes and count it as like a half of a card sort of thing. I wouldn't count it as a full card, especially like something like Jeska's Will. That card I would consider to be card draw and ramp, so I would count it as, well, semi-card draw because it does get you 3 cards, but it's burst card draw and it's burst ramp. So I would count it as half of each. I would count it in both sections because of the effects. But again, I wouldn't count a lot of these cantrip, well, not cantrip, but sort of cantrip sort of style mana producers. So things that make mana fast and sort of, don't really stay. Like Dockside Extortionist is one of those ones that sort of, it comes down, it makes a lot of treasures, and those treasures can stick around, but it's done what it's done. Like, again, maybe you can recur it, or maybe you can flicker it or do other things with it, but again, for the most part, it's done what it's done. It's not going to do any more. Same with, I can't remember what the spell is that's like 7 mana, and it makes a treasure for every land you have. I can't remember what it's called. But that one, again, same thing. I wouldn't count it. And again, it is 7 mana, so it's kind of like, well, Again, those treasures can stick around for a bit, but again, since they're not producing mana for next turn a lot of the time, or for more turns than what you can activate them for once, it just means I don't think that they're real, fit into this category. They fit into another category, and I might talk about it in another time. But, when you're looking at 3 mana Rocks, this is just where it completely falls off the board for me. Like 1 mana Rocks, you've pretty just much got Soul Ring, and then at 2 mana, you've got a few options, and then at 3, I'm just like, well, I wouldn't play these for the most part at all. And again, as I say, I don't play Mana Rocks, but when I look at Mana Rocks and I go, yeah, what's playable and what's good and what's decent and what would I actually play if I was building a deck with them, I just look at almost all the 3 mana Rocks and go, nah, most of these don't do enough for what you want. Coalition Relics, probably like the best one, and that one sees hardly any play at all whatsoever. Actually, I think it'd be really good in like a +1/+1 counters decks, but since most of the +1/+1 counters decks are in green, you just don't need it. So yeah, there's all kinds of things that are out there that just sort of go, well, this card's not as good. A lot of people run Command Sphere. I don't really like Command Sphere. Command Sphere is okay, but I don't think it's actually that good. I think it's kind of just bad. I think people look at the fact that it's free card draw and just kind of go, yeah, I'll put it in. Plus, it's like another option. Like, I prefer Mind Stone over it, and I know why people don't like Mind Stone as much, in a way, is because they think that 1 mana that they have to pay into Mind Stone to sack it to draw a card will matter. And it doesn't really. It just comes down so much earlier. And again, even if it comes down later, it just doesn't matter. You just get another card. You just spend 3 to draw a card. So that's not that bad, it's not that great, but it's better than nothing. I just find that most of the time Mind Stone comes down, you just play it, you get a few turns out of it. If somebody, goes to blow up the board, or if you don't need it for a few turns, and you're just like, well, I have enough mana now because I've finally gotten, to the mid to late game or whatnot, so I don't really need this. You just sack it to draw a card and just sort of set up to play more Magic. Again, those cards that just sort of can replace themselves later on in the game, I would just use them over a lot of these. Like, I see so many people run Chromatic Lantern, and I understand why people, again, run it. But the thing is, when I look at it, and when, we look at cards like this, well, what's it really doing? Like, the first ability, for the most part, as I said before, is irrelevant. Like, it fixing all your mana to, fix for any color. Well, what does that do? That hardly does anything, because, again, for the most part, when you're building a deck, you're going, okay, I'll put all these dual lands in, or these tri-lands, or all these lands that basically tap for colors that my commander produces. It's like, well, okay, so why did you spend so much time putting so much work into your mana base if you're going to put that in? Like, that just invalidates the fact that you put any time in your mana base. This is a card for people who put literal 0 time in their mana base. And again, sure, in 4 or more colors, it starts to become a little bit more relevant. But again, it's just like not that much more relevant, really. Again, if you put enough time into your mana base, and even on a budget, you can still find enough dual lands and tri-lands and multicolor lands that are fairly cheap. Yeah, sure, they all enter tapped or whatever, but even that I still find is better than just running a card like this. The other ability, just for it being a mana lift, that's what it is. It's a mana lift that just so happens to say your lands can tap for another color maybe, and that doesn't really matter that much, so you're just running a mana lift. And no one runs mana lift, literally, because it's a bad card, it just doesn't really do much. And there's just so many better options. Again, when you've got so many better options, and again, you can spend some time and, a few cents even on the most budget mana base to actually have enough, types of each color. You just don't need cards like this. Like, and again, once you start getting above 3, I just like, well, what's the point in running any of these mana rocks? What am I going to do? Ramp into more ramp? Like, what's the point in that? Like, again, the point of my deck is not to ramp into more ramp, to, oh, wait, just you wait until I ramp into more ramp. Oh boy. Like, that doesn't sound like an exciting plan to a deck. Yes, sure, Omnath is a bit of a different sort of beast, but that's completely different because you're getting something out of ramping. You're getting creatures out of ramping. You're getting things that can kill people if you can sack them, or you can get into combat, or if you can do other things with them, and whatnot. So it doesn't really compare at all. That's a completely different thing. And in that deck, you just really want all the ramp in the world all the time, because, no matter which Omnath it is, I think mostly the 2-color one and the 4-color one, at least, you want all the ramp because you just I want all the mana. But again, that's completely different. Like I see people playing some of the cards that, Gigantha. It's not a mana rock, but again, this is one of those cards that it taps for a lot of mana. Yeah, sure, it goes into certain decks, and it's pretty good in those decks. I can't remember what the 7 mana rock is that taps for 5 mana, and it basically has the same text as Chromatic Lantern. For the most part, you can have any mana be any mana color or any mana of essentially. I don't think that that's really that good, but again, I can see when it's pretty good in those Golos decks and whatnot, and 5-color Sihili decks or whatever. So it can be good, but for the most part, in most decks, they're just not that good. Those mana rocks that don't really do very much. Yeah, they have some other abilities, but for the most part, those abilities aren't that good. Realistically, they aren't that good. They don't get you the card back worth that they're actually printed on. Like, if they got you your card back and you felt good about it, like, I have to spend 10 mana now, like, on this turn to draw a card, maybe in my 5-color deck or whatever, or draw a couple cards in my 5-color deck, maybe. Like, that just seems really bad. And then I've got to untap again. Again, it's just like, well, sure, in like Golos, because you're just like, well, I don't care because I'm just going to use it for Golos and just get 3 free things off the top. That's really good. Like, I understand that. But again, for the most part, the cards that are later, the later they are, the better they need to be. The more impactful they need to be immediately. Like, I see a lot of people running, whatever it is, let's say Jeweled Lotus. But it's not Jeweled Lotus, it's the other one that has, Gilded Lotus. Gilded Lotus, there we go. I got my J and my G mixed up there for a minute. But yeah, I see people play Gilded Lotus quite a bit, and I see people play the colorless version of that quite a bit as well. Like, in certain decks, yeah, it's a bit different, because if you're in a colorless deck, yeah, sure, your options are a lot shorter and a lot less. But again, I just find that when you're sitting there and looking at these cards, you can just go, okay, is it more than 3 CMC? Okay, I'm probably going to cut them unless those are the absolute only options that I absolutely have, and I have 0 money, and I don't want to trade these cards in that are probably worth some amount of money, because I don't understand why, but still those cards for some reason are worth money to some people, at least, and people think that they're decent enough for certain things, or they have some other synergies in certain decks, and I don't know whether they're played in Standard or Pioneer or Modern or whatnot, all these other things. Well, definitely not Modern, but again, like, I don't know about those other formats for the most part where some of these other cards are played, so I don't really know whether the demand is there from those formats. I just don't follow them. But again, when you're playing these cards, you can just have like easily 6 or 7 cards depending on what your colors are. Like, first I would go Sol Ring, then the Signets in your 2-color pair, then the Talisman that's in your 2-color pair if you can get your hands on it. Then I would go Felwar Stone and Arcane Signet. So that's, like 5 of your 10 ramp spells done. Like, you only need like 5 more, and then I would go Mind Stone, so that's 6. So then you only need like 4 more, and it's not hard to really get there from there, like, again. So yeah, there's a lot of other options. Like, again, even the land that and this is another tangent, but again, even the land, like Myriad Landscape, it isn't a mana rock, but it basically gives you more mana. That's another effect that I would, think about. It's in my deck, I can get more lands. It helps if you're in 1 or 2 colors a bit more, and if you have more basics, I guess, but it is more relevant. I would look at cards like Burnished Heart and cards like that, or Solemn Simulacrum, because, like, even Solemn isn't the best, and like, Burnished Heart isn't amazing, but even so, they can be more relevant sometimes because you've got other effects, especially like Burnished Heart. If again you have Sun Titan, you can get the Burnished Heart back, sack it again, get some more lands. It's just very good in that circumstance. Yeah, sure, you're getting less and less, you're getting less and less chance again through your deck to get lands off the top. So you're getting more gas when you're doing this for the most part again. So that is really good as well. So, like, there's a lot of little things, and again, yeah, sure, the ability is still 3 mana, but 3 mana to get 2 lands isn't a bad rate when you start recurring it like that just for free. So, you know, but anyway, you know, that has been my little discussion, quote unquote, or rant on getting a bit more nitpicky with, you know, mana rocks and whatnot. So, you know, tell me, guys, what do you think about mana rocks? Which ones do you find good or playable when you go to play your decks that are not in green and whatnot? Because, again, of course, you wouldn't play them in green. You're not a fool, you know, unless you're in one of those really weird decks that wants it, like Glissa, or whatever her name is. So, yeah, but anyway, guys, let me know what you guys think. Write them down there in the comments below. Please remember that the success of channels like this is based on viewers like you, so please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing if you would like to support this content. You can also get social with us on our Discord and on our Facebook. If you would like to further support the channel, you can go onto our Patreon. All links are in the description. Thank you for your support. It really means a lot. I hope you have enjoyed this video here today. And if you have, I hope you will come back for another one. See you then.